Good morning, dear doctors. We about welcome you all for our today's Anticoagulation Academy, Novaks Form CME. Myself, I am Dr. Bharat Kumar. I represent Medical Affairs of Critical Cardiology at Abbott Healthcare. Firstly, I would like to welcome our experts to today's CME and also all the viewers for our today's CME. As you all know, we about being a global leaders in pharmaceutical space, we try to create a better healthcare solution for healthcare professionals in order to partner with them for a better patient care and management. So for this, we do many therapy shaping initiatives in order to disseminate knowledge on particular therapy. So we being leaders in anticoagulation space, we want to disseminate knowledge on anticoagulation management in various diseases like stroke prevention, atrial fibrillation, DVT, and many other aspects. So for this, we have three eminent experts who are going to talk on these aspects in detail, and also they are going to address the challenges involved in management of anticoagulation in various disorders like stroke prevention, atrial fibrillation, DVT, and many other aspects, focusing on a NOACs. So let me welcome our experts, and also I would like to tell you the agenda of the meeting. Firstly, we have three sessions in today's meeting. First session is on thromboembolic disorders in India and overview, which will be taken by Dr. Vijay Kumar sir. Is a senior consultant and interventional cardiologist working in Vijaya Hospital, Chennai. Dr. Vijay Kumar sir is the moderator for today's event. So he is going to talk on thromboembolic disorders and anticoagulation management in various disorders. He is going to give a brief overview on all these aspects, and also is the moderator for the today's session. So on behalf of Abbott, I would like to welcome Dr. Vijay Kumar sir for our today's CME. Followed by, we have a second session on stroke prevention atrial fibrillation, which will be taken by Dr. G. Venkatesh sir. Is a consultant interventional cardiologist working in Vijaya Hospital, Chennai. He is going to talk on stroke prevention atrial fibrillation in various into case-based scenarios there. So on behalf of Abbott, I would like to welcome Dr. G. Venkatesh sir for our today's CME. Followed by, we have a third session that is on anticoagulation management in patients with a DVT, which will be taken by Dr. Ramanathan sir. Is a consultant and interventional cardiologist working in Vijaya Hospital, Chennai. He is going to talk on anticoagulation management in DVT with a two-case scenario, proximal and distal DVT. So on behalf of Abbott, I would like to welcome Dr. Ramanathan sir for our today's CME. Followed by this, we have a fourth session is on panel discussion, where our experts shall discuss regarding the challenges involved in anticoagulation management in various disorders, and also they shall discuss the use of NOACs in different disorders. So on behalf of Abbott, I would like to welcome all our experts for the panel discussion, and also I would like to I shall take up a few questions of the viewers. So I shall request all our viewers to put your questions queries in the chat box. So at the end of the panel discussion, we shall address your queries also. So once again, I would like to welcome our viewers to the today's meeting. Before starting the scientific sessions of for the day, I shall give you all a brief introduction on Abbott. As you all know, we Abbott we are nurturing healthcare since 130 years, and we are having global footprints in 150 countries. And in India itself, we have 3 manufacturing plants. And for localized solutions, we have more than 100 researchers working for Abbott. And since 130 years, we have given many breakthrough health products. Especially in pharmaceuticals field, we are given high quality medicines covering 80% of the area. In nutrition field, we are given a science-based nutrition for all stages of life. In diagnostics field, we are given next generation device for accurate and timely information. And in diabetes care, we are the pioneers with our glucose monitoring devices. And in cardiovascular field, we are the leaders with our medical device and technology. And in neuromodulation, we are given a life-changing technology for a chronic pain and movement disorder. We Abbott being one of the largest global diversified healthcare companies and equal size of business in pharmaceuticals, diagnostics, medical devices, and nutrition, and having manufacturing and research centers around the world with approximately 1 lakh employees working for Abbott globally. We Abbott have a diverse portfolio which is aligned with the healthcare trends. Especially in pharmaceuticals portfolio, we have Abbott India Limited, Abbott Healthcare Solutions, Ristora. In diagnostics portfolio, we have Abbott Diagnostic Division, Abbott Molecular, Abbott Point of Care. In medical devices portfolio, we have about diabetes care, about medical optics, about vascular, and in nutrition portfolio, we have about nutrition. We have been in India since 1910, and our values are guiding us to be pioneers in science and commercialization and achieving customer-focused outcome and caring and making a difference in people's life and enduring towards commitment and purpose. Taking leadership not to disseminate knowledge on anticoagulation, we about with the help of our experts, we could able to build a consensus and also do a patient registry, which was published in like a handbook on asinopumarol, that is oral anticoagulants in clinical practice, and also we could able to publish a two review article. One is on asinopumarol and another is on valve replacement. And also, we could do a study that is a confidence registry where we collected the data from 1,000 patients who are on asinopumarol and warfarin, and in order to understand the stability between these two. So, in this study, it was concluded that asinopumarol is more stable compared to warfarin. Our another is the first we published the first ever Indian practice guidelines in cardiac surgery, that is follow up and management of valvular heart disease patient with prosthetic valve, a clinical practice guideline for an Indian scenario. This was published in Indian Journal of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery in IACT's journal, and this was presented in Indian IACT's conference last year in 2019 in Chennai. These guidelines highlights regarding anticoagulation, initiation, monitoring, and factors affecting anticoagulation, regarding management of prosthetic valve complication and also management of concomitant cardiac disease. This guideline highlights regarding anticoagulation in special case profiles like renal compromised patients, elderly people, pregnant women, and patients on multiple medication and who are non-compliant and also who are having unconstrained food habits. And we are doing many patient support programs in the form of PTNR monitoring camps where free PTNR will be checked for the patients. With this help of more than 40,000 patients are being benefited every year. And we are also doing a patient education campaign where we're giving a booklet on dietary consideration for the patients who are on anticoagulation. And also we're giving a booklet called Stable Life, which will help them to maintain a stable life with anticoagulation therapy and also anticoagulation ID card. Through this education campaign, we are aspiring to reach more than 2.5 lakh patients. And our another patient support program is the Heart Valve Clinic. It's an initiative in order to improve access to diagnosis and treatment of valvular heart disease. Especially through this initiative, we are identifying high prevalence geographies and identifying new patients and initiative work on facilitated valvular heart disease diagnosis. This Valve Companion Kit, our another is a patient support initiative where Valve Companion Kit, which will be given to for patients who are onboarding for new surgery. This Valve Companion Kit consists of a dietary consideration booklet, stable life booklet, a valve guide, and a therapy starter and an anticoagulation ID card. Through this initiative, we are touching more than 50,000 patients. And we are come up with a digital initiative, that is we have a website and therapy that is on website on asinopumarol, where a patient can all can get to know more about asinopumarol versus warfarin indications and regarding oral anticoagulation therapy, and also patient can get to know about many disease aspects where patient education are there, so we can get to know more about regarding anticoagulation therapy and benefits of risk of many other things in this therapy website. Our another digital initiative is we have a QR code which is enabled in smart parts of navigator, that is Alexa. So once the patient scans the QR code, it will take him to a micro website where he can get to know more about therapy on atrial fibrillation, DVT, venous thromboembolism, stroke, and importance of navigator treatment. These therapy information is available in 12 regional language where he can select his preferable language and he can get to know more about therapy. So these are the few of about initiative in order to support the anticoagulation therapy through our eminent experts. Now we shall move to our scientific session where our eminent experts are going to talk on these topics. So now I shall request our moderator, Dr. Vijay Kumar sir, to take over the session. Over to you, sir.
Good morning to everyone. It is really nice to be here today. Thanks to Abboud and the thromboembolic disorders is a very important topic. Anticoagulation Academy had been kind enough to arrange this for the benefit of all of us. I think we also to be taught about how to use the laptop and computers a little bit more than about the anticoagulation. Thank you for teaching us that too. When we started our career in 1987, the prevailing thing was that there is no DVT in India.
Sir, 1 second. I request you to share the screen, sir.
Yeah, you are able to see now?
Yes, sir. It's coming.
Okay.
Yes, sir. You can just make it a full screen, sir.
Yeah, when we started my career, there was a existing dictum that DVT is not seen in India. From then onwards, we had come a long way seeing this deadly disease more and more often, and sometimes leading to death because of pulmonary thromboembolism. Both in
sorry to interrupt, sir. I shall request you to make it a full screen, sir. There is a last corner button in the right and below corner, sir.
right.
You can make it.
I am seeing the full screen.
No, sir. We are not able to see full screen, sir. That's sir. There's a button next to yes, sir. Next left, little left, sir. Come down, sir. Come down. Yes, sir. There, next to that minimizing screen, one button is there. You can just click on that. No, you're going up, sir. Come down. A little above, sir. Above. Little above. Left, little left. Next. Yes, you click on that, sir.
That is fit slide to the current window.
The technical team, can I just come? Bhavesh?
Is it okay now?
No, sir. Now share is not. Stop the screen now. Share is not share. Do not share the screen, sir. Hello.
You're able to see this now?
Yes, sir. You can go ahead, sir, with that one.
Yeah, I think we'll go ahead with this one.
Yes.
So from the days where there was no DVT, we had come to a situation where we had been seeing more of venous thromboembolism, both in surgical and non-surgical patients. Some people coming with fatal pulmonary embolism, near fatal pulmonary embolism without any evidence of surgery, just prolonged standing or prolonged travel. As we looked into DVT those days, there was no definite diagnostic modality except impedance plethysmography, etc. But with the advent of ultrasound, we're able to pick up more and more DVTs in this high-risk population, and a lot of them are not receiving prophylaxis to prevent pulmonary thromboembolism. The long-term complications like PPH is very, very important, and this results to substantial morbidity and mortality. We should look into how do we prevent the venous thromboembolism and how do we treat deep venous thrombosis, and also its role in myocardial infarction patients with LV clot or LA clot. Prosthetic clot, definitely we started our anticoagulation experience with prosthetic valves, and we had seen disastrous effects of hemorrhage in prosthetic valve patients, to the extent we used to say doing a wall surgery is removing one disease and putting another disease inside. Atrial fibrillation, as the population is getting older, we are seeing more and more of atrial fibrillation, and the consequences of stroke were really disabling in this elderly population. Paradoxical embolism, mitral valve disease with dilated cardiomyopathy, in all these places, we do have a place for oral anticoagulation. In our situation, most of the people where there are young people, they will be very reluctant to take the medications despite whatever the counseling we do. The cost factor in most of the individuals will force us to use acetylene rather than direct oral anticoagulations. There is a limitation in monitoring and also screening them for other disorders and other medications. Atrial fibrillation is the commonest rhythm disorder, and it's surprising that 1/4 of individuals over 40 years of age develop this arrhythmia. It is not the persistent AF that is worrisome, but it is the intermittent AF which will not be detected. Patients will come with TIA or a stroke, but the rhythm will be normal. Despite getting a Holter for 24 hours or an extended Holter, it may remain normal. Intermittent AF is very dangerous, and sometimes it's very difficult to diagnose. As the overall incidence of DVT is clinically investigative as well proved, it is mandatory that these individuals get appropriate treatment to prevent pulmonary embolism. When we look at any oral anticoagulation, either direct or indirect, we look at the benefit of giving that to prevent thromboembolism. And sometimes we underestimate the risk of thromboembolism. And we also overestimate the risk of hemorrhage. Hemorrhage sometimes intracerebral can be almost like devastating, especially in elderly people. When you look at the mechanism of action, vitamin K dependent, and which is another one is direct oral anticoagulation. The major important thing that we should remember is that we still have currently no antidote for direct oral anticoagulants, unlike vitamin K dependent. The long-term effects and the follow-up of, especially from the valvular heart disease patients, the recurrent rates used to be 1 in 100 patient years. So we have solid data about the long-term clinical experience with vitamin K and antagonists, whereas with direct oral anticoagulations, we don't have such data. In various patient profiles, various medicines can be preferred, and also patients, depending upon the patient's choice, the medication can be altered. As you know that we are seeing more of elderly people, we are seeing more of people with chronic kidney disease and hepatic disease, and these points have to be remembered when we treat them with direct oral anticoagulation. Thank you. I request, I think, Dr. GV to go ahead with his presentation. How do I get out of this?
Is my presentation full screen?
One second, sir, it's coming. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can go ahead, sir. You can start.
Yeah. Very good afternoon to everybody. First of all, at the outset, thank my mentor, Professor Dr. Vijay Kumar sir, my friend Ramanathan, and the Abbott India for putting me in this forum and bringing me to this online platform. Thank you so much to one and all. Going straight to the topic without wasting much of the time, today's topic, what I'm going to talk about is stroke prevention particularly it is in non-valvular atrial fibrillation. I deliberately left out about the valvular atrial fibrillation because this is the arena where the non-valvular AF is where we have a lot of dilemmas and unclarities, so many things. So today's my focus is going to be just on stroke prevention in non-valvular atrial fibrillation. To move on, there are actually two ways of preventing stroke in patients with non-valvular AF. One is by medication, and the second one is by mechanical methods. If you look at the mechanical method, that's the second one. What are the mechanical methods? One is by excluding the left atrial appendage, either by surgery, by ligation, or by ligation, or just excision of the left atrial appendage. Or there are certain devices where you can occlude the left atrial appendages. But we are not going to go into deep discussion about that because it is placed as of now in class 2B in ESC, that is European Society of Cardiology guidelines. I'll come to that in the later slides. So today's our focus is going to be just on more about how to use and where to use and how to handle these medications, particularly to prevent the stroke in non-valvular atrial fibrillation. There are two major class of medications. One is the vitamin K antagonist, that is VKA, either warfarin or azenocomarol. The newer one is called the newer oral anticoagulants, which are again classified into two things. One is direct thrombin inhibitors, or the other one is direct 10A inhibitors. Dabigatran is the classical example of direct thrombin inhibitor, whereas direct 10A inhibitors are rivaroxaban, apixaban, and adaroxaban. So these are, you have to know just 5 names here: warfarin or azenocomarol or dabigatran or rivaroxaban or apixaban or adaroxaban. So classically today we are going to look into where and when and how to use these drugs in patients with non-valvular AF to prevent their strokes. So before going into just a brief thing, if you look at warfarin or azenocomarol, it inhibits this portion, it inhibits this portion, it inhibits this portion, it inhibits this portion. That's the biggest disadvantage because it inhibits all the varied pathways of the coagulation pathway. This is warfarin or azenocomarol, the previous vitamin K antagonist. So that is the very reasons all the feedback communications also are stopped here so that their actions are a little bit erratic. Whereas if you look at dabigatran, it is a direct thrombin inhibitor. So it inhibits only those portions. And if you look at the other one, 10A, rivaroxaban, apixaban, etc., it inhibits only this portion. So if you draw a line over here, we have come to the common pathway. So the newer oral anticoagulants are very specific. They are very measurable, give a very predictable results, basically because they are doing a good job on the final common pathway below this. So we have a very predictable results. So if you go on to the next slide, why should we anticoagulate in patients with non-valvular AF? Because any AF, the stroke chances gets 5-fold more than the common population. So this is a very dramatic morbidity which creates in the humans. So by using an oral anticoagulant, this risk drastically reduces by 64%. So which has been very statistically significant. So for any patient with AF, we have to think twice, thrice before not using an anticoagulation. So the next question is, whom to anticoagulate? So if all the patients comes with non-valvular AF, how do we choose the patient whom we should coagulate and whom we should not coagulate? So there have been a number of scores across the globe, but the most validated among them is the CHADS-VASc score here. So that is the score which is being well validated across the non-valvular AF. So as the name itself expands, they have given scores for every risk factor that carries over here. So all these things need not be memorized because it is just a click away in your cell phones. So first and foremost example is congestive cardiac failure. Here, one important thing I would like to highlight is that it is not just low EF. Even patients with normal EF who have a symptomatic heart failure comes under a score 1. And hypertension, whether even if it is under good control, not control, still it carries a risk of 1. And age, if you see there are 2 platforms here. The more the age, the more the risk over here. And lesser the age, lesser the risk over there. So anybody who is more than 64 years will come into this risk score. So this age from 64 onwards is going to be a continuum. It's going to be a continuum as it increases, the score increases. So if it is going to be more than 75, you give a score of 2. And next is diabetes. It carries a score of 1. And another most important thing is that, which carries a very high value here, is if the patient has already got a symptom because of this atrial fibrillation, like a stroke already, or a systemic thromboembolism, or a TAA kind of situation, they carry a higher risk over here. And the next and last one is that any vascular disease, not only the coronaries, peripheral artery disease, carotid disease, mesenteric disease, so anywhere, if you have an additional vascular disease, they also carry a score of 1. So if you tally all these things in your patients, and if the patient has got, even if any one of these patients need to be put on oral anticoagulant agents without fail. So one of the important problems in this is that this CHADS risk score did not include so many other risk factors which has been proven to be stroke risk factors. Like example, a patient with renal failure has got a higher stroke chance, obesity, obstructive sleep apnea, biomarkers, especially a large LA in echo, or sometimes when there is a low left atrial appendage velocities and small vessel diseases in cerebral imaging. All these factors have been shown very clearly that they have an added stroke risk factors, but unfortunately they are not being included in CHADS VASC score. So when you take a clinical judgment, it is not just you go by the score, you have to take the person as an individual and calculate everything together in the given scenario. So once you start on an anticoagulant, the biggest problem you are going to face is bleeding, especially intracranial bleed. So we need to figure out who will have a chance of bleed and who will not have a chance of bleed. So again, there has been a score. It's called Hasbled score. So as it terms, there is a group has been exemplified here. That is hypertension, abnormal renal or liver functions, a stroke, a bleeding history, a labile INR, very old age, or drugs, alcohol, drugs like steroids, aspirin. If the patient is on that, we give a score for these values and you come to a conclusion. If the score is 0, then absolutely this patient has got a very, very minimal chance of bleeding due to the anticoagulation. If the score is more than 3, then these patients are the persons who need to be under more vigil, more repeated revisits, more reassurance, more re-educated about all the issues where the chances will be going to be. But none of this course doesn't preclude you from using an anticoagulation. It is just to mind you that we have to be on a more important vigil in this situation. So coming to the next choice, first we talked about why we should anticoagulate, then we talked about whom we should anticoagulate, and then we thought about who will bleed. And now we have to choose what medication, whether we are going to choose a vitamin K antagonist or we are going to go on to the newer oral anticoagulants. So how do we choose this? There is again a simple guidelines for this, what we call is SAMI TTR score. So again, this has got a list like female sex will have 1 point, age will have 1 point, and medical history of any of this will have 1 point, and interacting drugs will have 1 point, like an amiodarone tobacco use or a race will have 2 points. So again, assimilating all these things, you put on a score. If the score is between 0 to 2, then in that situation, it will be pretty wise to use a vitamin K antagonist. But if the score moves beyond 3 or 3, then it is always preferable to use a newer oral anticoagulant like a dabigatran or rivaroxaban or apixaban as a group. So summing up all these things, first, if the patient in your busy clinic comes to you with non-valvular AF, that is either paroxysmal or a persistent AF, the first thing is to quickly try to assess the CHADS VASC score. If the score is 0, you don't need to mind, just treat the AF and the patient need not be put on anticoagulants. Even if the patient has got 1 or more score, then your next step is to detect a SAMI TTR score. If that score is less than or equal to 2, then you can give a prescription of a vitamin K antagonist. But if the score is going to be more than 2, then preferably newer oral anticoagulant should be the choice. So just a brief account about these both group as and what are the advantages and disadvantages before choosing things. As we all know, warfarin and acetocomerol has been in vogue for almost more than 90 years. It was brought into clinical practice in 1930. So from that time, the studies has been well established. So we have got a well established molecule, number one. Number two is the cost. It is a very, very low cost so that any common man can afford. And another more important is, in fact, if the patient has got a becoming more anticoagulated or he develops a bleeding symptom, we have a definite antidote like vitamin K or FFP so that it can be reversed quickly and bail him out of the crisis. And more importantly, this is also useful in end-stage renal diseases. But biggest disadvantage is what I feel here is that you need to maintain a very, very optimal PT-INR, that is prothrombin time, which is very, very difficult in the given situation because this drug has got a complicated drug-food interactions. We sit in a clinics and you'll have to suggest them that you don't need the green leafy food, the list runs a mile long. But for an example, if a patient comes to you who is already taking acetron or vitamin K antagonist, and if his hemoglobin is dropped now because of an iron deficiency or something like that, then we would like to give him a food which contains more iron. A food which contains more iron, again, it's leafy vegetables, which cannot be given in vitamin K anticoagulations. So either way, if you go back, this will hit. If you come back, this will hit. So you are caught in between two devils. So here, titrating the medicine is going to be a billion-dollar question. So one more thing, what I have always felt is there is no absolute guidelines for the interval of testing, whether the PT-INR should be tested every month or once in 3 months or once in 6 months, because from time to time, from space to space, from person to person, this PT-INR constantly keeps changing. So there is no clear guidelines to test these patients and give an optimum vitamin K antagonist. So even in the best of best hands, what we call is TTR, that is time for the range. So that range where you maintain PT-INR between 2 to 3 is less than 70% in most of the patients where we use vitamin K. So these problems are negated with newer oral anticoagulants because it has got a very few drug interactions. And another more important advantage is that it has got a very rapid onset and a very rapid offset. So the moment you give it, unlike the vitamin K antagonist, it takes almost 4 to 5 days for its action to come. But here, within 2 to 4 hours, you get the action. And once you stop it in case of an emergency or a bleed, within 24 to 48 hours, the action goes off from your body. So that is the greatest advantage of using a newer oral anticoagulant. But on the other side, what are the disadvantages? It looks it's a little bit pretty cost, especially in COVID times where economically everybody is from the home to the country. The first thing the patient tries to stop is the costly medicines. So here it becomes an all or none phenomenon. If he stops, he's absolutely off anticoagulation and his chance of stroke is going to be high. So that is a disadvantage. And some of the newer oral anticoagulants are twice daily dosings. So many times as the number of dosing increases, their non-compliance becomes more and more. And another important thing is these drugs cannot be used in end-stage renal diseases. Of course, it can be used in renal failures up to a GFR of 30 ml, but in end-stage renal disease, it is not wise to use them. And as it was already previously mentioned, there is no proper reversal agents when we come across traumatic bleeding, that is major bleeding, except for dabigatran, where now we have come across with idarucimab, which is helpful and it has been proven to be a good reversal agent. Except for dabigatran, none of the other agents have a proper reversal agent. So now moving on to the last session of our talk, the dilemmas, where all we have dilemmas. Now we were very clear that you choose the CHAT score, you choose the SAMI2 score, and you know whether you use to BKA or no or NOACS. But there are areas, there are very gray zones. There are 4 or 5 gray zones which I'll be covering in the next 5 minutes. One is the post-op AF, that is post-op, post-CABG, bypass surgery. In this situation, approximately 10 to 15% of the people tend to develop atrial fibrillations. So how do we deal with these patients? The atrial fibrillation which occurs just for 1 hour, 2 hours, within a day reversal, we are not just worried about them. We just treat them and with the heparin and get away with that. But I am talking about the paroxysmal or the persistent AF that happens after the CABG, that persists even up to the time of discharge on the 7th day. In this situation, it is reasonable to use a newer oral anticoagulant in this period because it appears to be more safe, number one. And the duration for is approximately only 3 months because 98% of this post-op atrial fibrillations disappears by the 3rd month. So it would be wise to do even monitoring at the 3rd month. And if there is no evidence of AF, you can stop all the oral anticoagulants. The next dilemma is the non-valvular AF in pregnancy. This is very rare, but still you have to keep in mind when you come across a non-valvular AF in pregnancy, one thing you should know is that NOACs are absolutely contraindicated. So we have to use vitamin K antagonist, and the principle is going to be same as pregnancy with prosthetic valve. So how you will do a prosthetic valve in pregnancy, you have to follow the same principles while using a vitamin K antagonist in pregnancy. So coming to the most important arena for interventional cardiologists is here, there, where when you happen to do a percutaneous coronary intervention in an AF patient who is already on an anticoagulant, or if a patient develops an atrial fibrillation in due course during the PCI, how do we deal with them? So one important randomized study which was published in 2015 is that which compared both with vitamin K antagonist with clopidogrel and vitamin K antagonist with DAPT, that is dual antiplatelet agent. And it clearly showed that a single antiplatelet agent along with vitamin K antagonist was safe without any increase in adverse events. But we cannot just go by this statement. I would like to clarify one more thing, that there is no data, there is no randomized trial to compare NOACs or the newer antiplatelet agents like the ticagrelor or a combination of these things to say whether it is good or bad. We don't have any data on that. So to sum up, in this situation where you are going to do a PCI in AF patients or a patient develops in PCI after the PCI, it is preferable to tailor, to individualize the treatment for every single patient. Take into account the thrombogenicity of the patient, how much the coronary thrombus burden is there, how is the LV function, if there is a LA clot or LV clot. Taking all into this account, you can use either an oral anticoagulant and a short course of dual antiplatelet therapy, and then gradually switching off over to a single antiplatelet agent. And one important point I would like to underline is that the newer agent ticagrelor can potentiate newer oral anticoagulants, like especially dabigatran. When you use dabigatran, you should be very cautious that when we use ticagrelor along with that, it potentiates its action. So it is a clinical judgment. Either you use an oral anticoagulant with a single agent or a dual agent, and the duration is left up to the physician and the patient's condition. The next one, what we come across is whenever most of the time in a sitting in a private clinic, the patient comes for fitness for some surgery when the patient is already on an anticoagulant. So here, when we talk about the newer oral anticoagulant, it is very easy because you stop for just 24 to 48 hours before the procedure is absolutely sufficient for any surgery to attain a complete hemostasis. For dabigatran alone, if you need to go ahead and still assess, you can assess APTT and know the amount of dabigatran left out in your body. But absolutely 24 to 48 hours for any major surgery should be pretty good enough to go ahead with an elective or an emergency surgery. So the last dilemma, what I often come across is in an AF patient coming with a stroke, my registrar calls me and tells me that there is a stroke, but he has a hemorrhagic transformation of an infarct. So how do we deal with that? Now we have to use an anticoagulant or not? So straightforward infarct, we don't have any complication. We can straight away go ahead and use an oral anticoagulant and get away with that. But if the patient has developed a hemorrhagic infarct, that is, it has got a transformation, it has got transformed into a hemorrhage, then how do you do? You should restart an anticoagulant after 6 to 3 months after repeating the brain imaging. So we repeat the brain imaging at 6 weeks or 3 months interval and make sure that the condition is resolved, and immediately start anticoagulant as early as possible from 6 weeks to 3 months, because recurrent embolic stroke is going to be on the higher side in this group. And one more thing is, if the patient comes to you with the AF and he has got a cerebral hemorrhage, then it is even more worse. So wait till the hemorrhage completely resolves in these patients, and restart the anticoagulation judiciously. Because even in these patients, it has been clearly documented that future ischemic strokes are on the higher stage in a patient with AF. In the first slide, I left out an area that is mechanical waste. So how do we deal with that? So left atrial appendage device occluder may be a choice in these patients where anticoagulation is an absolute contraindication. When you think that the hemorrhage is too big and it can't be handled, then to avoid further strokes, left atrial appendage occluder may be a choice in this place. So finally, take-home message would be, I will put it in another way. If a patient comes to you with a non-valvular AF, first write down a prescription of an anticoagulant. Make sure that you have to give an anticoagulant and be convinced, be strong enough that to find out any reason which you don't need to. So you first write down for all patients, and then you should find out unless you have a strong reason for not using it. So you make sure that you have a strong reason for not using. You don't need a strong reason to use, but you need a strong reason for not using it. So if you look at the meta-analysis which was published in Circulation 2012, NOACs as a group has been significantly better in efficacy as well as in safety when compared to warfarin. So in this group, NOACs like dabigatran, rivaroxaban, apixaban may be a better choice in patients with non-valvular AF than patients to use vitamin K antagonists as a whole. But individualize every patient. Decision to anticoagulate and the agents should be highly individualized. Talk to the patient about the cost, efficacy, testing, the need for PTNR to be checked, all food interactions, everything has to be talked to the patient and optimally selected between vitamin K antagonist and NOACs. So, and one more important thing is this, once you start this, it is not a one-time password. You just write a prescription and ask the patient to come after a year. No, the patient has to be re-evaluated year after year, because the risk factors are very dynamic and it can change. And after some time, you may not be needing, or you may be needing in a better way. So constantly keep evaluating these patients about the need of an anticoagulant, whether to use NOAC or vitamin K from time to time and space to space and person to person. So we need to keep re-evaluating them because to evolve is human. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a very nice presentation, sir, with the enriched insights you put in the slides. So, very thankful to you, sir. We shall move to next session. I shall request Dr. Ramanathan, sir, to continue. Yes, sir. I request you to make it a full screen.
Yeah, I think, is it clear now?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You can start.
Yeah. Good afternoon, everybody. At the outset, I would like to thank Professor Dr. Vijay Kumar, who's our teacher, guide, and mentor for all of us, and my friends, especially Dr. GV and other people who helped us in this presentation, and also the Abhat, who has given the opportunity to present this Anticoagulation Academy. So I would like to go into the talk straight. Both Dr. Vijay Kumar and Dr. Venkatesh has made my job easy in the sense many of the general concepts which we wanted to show has already been dealt with. Some of the important aspects I will insist again, and the rest of the things I will try to skip. In next 15 to 20 minutes, we will see how to use the anticoagulation in deep venous thrombosis patients, that is mainly the venous thromboembolism, and how to manage those patients. So this is the talk for today. And first we have to understand the venous thromboembolism clinically. It can present either as a deep vein thrombosis or a pulmonary embolism. Many times we get the dilemma, what is the treatment protocol for pulmonary embolism? What is the treatment protocol for deep venous thrombosis? It's basically a subset of a same venous thromboembolism clinical episode, which is the spectrum, and the patient can present either as a DVT or as a pulmonary embolism. Except for acute, massive, hemodynamically unstable pulmonary embolism, where the reperfusion therapy comes into the role, the other treatment for pulmonary embolism as well as the significant proximal deep vein thrombosis is the same. And as you all know, it is a very frequent acute cardiovascular syndrome, next only to myocardial infarction and stroke. And the fatality is, it exceeds even the acute myocardial infarction, because they can have a sudden cardiac death, and the treatment many times it gets delayed. So if you see the reason for that venous thromboembolism, around 60% of the people will have some major risk factor, which will come to it little later, and 40% we won't be able to identify any particular risk factor, which we call it as idiopathic. And we have to specifically give importance in a patient with a woman with a venous thromboembolism, because the health issue because of the pregnancy, where the DVT is 5 times more common, and they may be on hormonal contraception or a postmenopausal therapy, which all increases the incidence of venous thromboembolism. And if you see any hospitalized patients, you can see almost from 10 to close to 80% of the patients can develop DVT in hospitalized setup, particularly sick patients. So it becomes very important to look into it and then to treat this venous thromboembolism. So if you see the prevalence, it is actually it is increasing from 2006 to 2050. If you see, the prevalence keeps on increasing, and it's expected to go more. So with this background of deep venous thrombosis, that is the venous thromboembolism disorder, so what are our goals to treat? We have to prevent the further extension of thrombus, particularly getting migrated into the pulmonary circulation. And also we have to promote the thrombus recanalization and its complications like post-thrombotic syndrome. And more importantly, once this episode is treated, we have to prevent the recurrence of this deep venous thrombosis. So the treatment, it is depends on various factors. So we have to look into, we have to understand basically some of the concepts here to decide the duration of this oral anticoagulant, and also to decide the choice of the oral anticoagulant. So we have to look at the source or extension of the thrombus, which I'll show you, whether it is a proximal DVT, distal DVT, superficial venous thrombosis, and we have to also identify any provoking factors or the etiology in the given patient. And then finally, we have to look into the benefits of oral anticoagulation versus the bleeding risk of oral anticoagulation in this patient. So if you see the benefits of oral anticoagulation in deep venous thrombosis, it's a very, very highly effective therapy, as it is proven it reduces the recurrent venous thromboembolism by more than 90%. But the picture is not all that rosy, and patients, after some point of time, they may have increased risk of bleeding also. But all the patients with pulmonary embolism or a DVT, significant DVT, should receive at least 3 months of anticoagulation, because that is the time the thromboembolic complications are more. And once you withdraw the anticoagulation, whether at 3 months or even after 1 year, the risk of recurrence expected to be similar. So how long to give the oral anticoagulation is another important factor which will come into it. So coming to the bleeding, the risk of major bleeding is very high in the first month of the anticoagulant treatment, and then slowly declines and remains stable over the time. If you take the patient who is on vitamin K antagonist, it is approximately 3% per year, which the patients develop major bleeding. And if you take the direct oral anticoagulants or the Novavax, there is 40% less bleeding chances, which already showed beautifully by Dr. GB in the first 3 to 12 months. So beyond 12 months, the extent that treatment of venous thromboembolism definitely is showing increased effectiveness, but at the same time, the bleeding also may be more close to 1 to 6% in various types of bleeding. So this is one particular slide which I would like all of you to look into it, where it gives in a nutshell, it is published in Circulation, their efficacy as well as the bleeding of antithrombotic agents in preventing recurrent venous thromboembolism. So if you take the azithromycin or warfarin, the hazard ratio is 0.12, which means if you give with or without OAC, that is the azithromycin, if the patient with azithromycin, the chances of developing is only 10% compared to 100% patients without azithromycin. So similarly, all the NOVAX are equally efficacious. You can see 0.18, 0.3. And to our surprise, we generally believe aspirin has got no role in venous thrombosis because aspirin is an antiplatelet agent. It predominantly is for white thrombus, not for the red thrombus. But many studies, it was initially only published in surgical papers, but now we see more and more studies. It is not as effective as the other anticoagulants, but it is definitely superior to placebo. So wherever patients we are not able to give this oral anticoagulations, aspirin is a strategy with very significantly less bleeding compared to all the other things. So now, having understood the basic concepts, we have to decide on the duration of the treatment also, because the duration, initially we may have to give parenteral, and then up to 3 months all the patients should receive anticoagulation. But in some subset of patients, we have to give the extended therapy, that is after 3 months, sometimes even indefinitely. So how to decide on it? It is based on the risk of recurrence. So to know the risk of recurrence only, we have to understand all these things. If it is the distal DVT means if you see the venous thrombosis, any iliofemoral or even up to the popliteal vein deep venous thrombosis is called as proximal DVT, and the infrapopliteal, that is the tibial veins, are called distal DVT. So if you see the recurrence in patients with deep venous thrombosis, those who have got distal DVT, the recurrence rate is a little less, that is 3%. Even for next 5 years, it is less than 10%. And if the patient is recurrent DVT, the patient has more than 10%, even close to 30%. And in the provoked, those who have got already risk factors, there are some major transient risk factors, minor transient risk factors, it varies up to 10 to 15%. And if you take the idiopathic subset, the risk of recurrence is more than at least 10% and even up to 30%. So because of these reasons, in any patient with unprovoked venous thromboembolism, we have to give possibly indefinitely. And in any patient with the recurrent, also we have to give indefinite anticoagulation. And in any patient with the distal, it's probably enough for to give up to 3 months. And this subset we have to decide. There are some scores like DASH scores also to decide on the duration of treatment. So now you have understood what is proximal DVT, what is distal DVT, what is provoked and what is unprovoked. And in the provoked category, we have to look at what are the provoking factors or what are the major risk factors, because this only decides the duration of oral anticoagulation in these patients. If you take the major risk factors, any major surgery lasting for more than 30 minutes, or any hospitalization or immobility more than 3 days, cesarean section, as well as any patient getting trauma involving the bones, then these are called major risk factors, which means in these subset of patients, the venous thromboembolism is most likely because of these risk factors in the absence of any other secondary factors. So these patients, generally, it is enough to give 3 months unless they develop a recurrence or they don't have any other factors. Whereas if they don't have any of these factors, these two categories, we have to be very, very careful, because though some of the minor risk factors like minor surgery or patients on estrogen therapy or pregnancy or leg injury without a bone involvement or long flight travel can be a precipitating or provoking factor, but this may not be the only cause for venous thromboembolism. So we have to decide on these patients the duration of anticoagulation, because the risk of recurrence in them is more than 3 to 8%. So if they belong to a high risk, definitely we have to give indefinitely. And similarly, the patient with the non-malignant but persistent risk factors, we have to give indefinitely. And if the patients with the active malignancy or previous episodes, and particularly patient with the antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, these are the subset of patients who develop this venous thromboembolism repeatedly. The chances of recurrence is very, very high. So basically, we have to look at the source, that is the proximal or distal DVT, look at the provoking factors, and then decide on the duration of the therapy. And coming to the choice of therapy, I think both the speakers already made my job easy. There are various oral anticoagulations starting from unfractionated heparin, low molecular weight heparin, vitamin K antagonists, warfarin, azithromycin, and the direct or newer or novel oral anticoagulants like dabigatran, rivaroxaban, and apixaban. I am not going in detail because it is already dealt with what are the advantages and disadvantages of azithromycin vitamin K antagonist. One frequent doubt we get always is what is the difference between the azinokemerol, that is azithromycin versus warfarin, and which one is superior in what aspect. So if you see a little bit of more details into it, the absorption is rapid in both the things, and the peak concentration occurs almost similarly, 3 to 4 hours, and it is a highly protein bound, and the half-life is short in case of azithromycin, whereas it is a longer half-life in warfarin, and the duration of action also little short in azithromycin and longer in warfarin. The most important thing, if you look at the excretion, it is only 60% renal excretion, 30% into the feces, whereas warfarin is predominantly renal excretion. So because of this reason, though vitamin K antagonist is not absolutely safe in ESRD, we don't have any other choice because Novax carries higher risk in patients with CKD or end-stage renal disease. So we are bound to use only azithromycin. In mild renal failure patients, some of the Novax can be used, which I will come to it. And the dependence of the other cytochrome phosphatase metabolic inducers and the stability and the availability, these are the differences. So if you look at it, the stable INR is achieved more with azithromycin, as well as the recurrence rate is slightly less with azithromycin compared with warfarin, which are probably the advantages of azithromycin over warfarin. So this has already been dealt with beautifully by Dr. GV, so I'm not going into it. And the difference between the various Novax also are already told. And the dabigatran is the only direct thrombin inhibitor. All the other 3 drugs inhibits the factor 10A. And the one important thing which I would like to show you is the clearance, that is the renal clearance. Because of this, none of the drugs are indicated when the creatinine clearance is less than 15 ml. But if the creatinine clearance is 15 to 30, these drugs can be tried. And one important practical aspect of these drugs is the rivaroxaban alone has to be given with the food because it gets almost 100% absorbed. So it has to be mandatorily taken with food. All the others can be taken with or without food. So the risk factors for major bleeding has already dealt with Haspelet score. These are some of the other important factors where I would like to focus you apart from the Haspelet score, particularly in Indian scenario when the patient has got alcohol abuse, or in elderly patients with frequent falls, though it doesn't come in the Haspelet score, this carries a very high risk for bleeding, and in patients with other liver failure and thrombocytopenia and the hematological disorders. So you have to look into all these risk factors before deciding on the anticoagulation. So how to give, how much to give, and what to give. So as per the latest guidelines, that is the European Society Guidelines 2019, updated the treatment of venous thromboembolism and pulmonary embolism. All the patients who developed a pulmonary embolism or a proximal DVT has to be on therapeutic anticoagulation at least for 3 months. And if the patient, the first episode is only because of a major reversible risk factor, as I told you already, like if it is a major surgery or immobilization more than 3 days, or the trauma involving the bones, and then without any other provoking risk factors, generally it is enough to give anticoagulation only for 3 months or at the most 6 months. But all the other patients, we have to look into the option of treating the patients with anticoagulation indefinitely, particularly in the patient with a recurrent venous thromboembolism, either a pulmonary embolism or a DVT, and when there is no identifiable major risk factor, these patients should receive this anticoagulation indefinitely. And one important point is vitamin K antagonists like azithromycin or warfarin only should be given in antiphospholipid. Novax or direct anticoagulation, direct oral anticoagulants should not be given in antiphospholipid antibody syndrome because it increases the thrombotic events as well as the bleeding events, which is shown in many studies. So it is kind of contraindicated in antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. And again, in patients with cancer, these things are not used. So in patients without cancer, the direct oral anticoagulants only is superior, as I already told by Dr. GB. It is clearly superior to vitamin K antagonists because of increased efficacy as well as very less bleeding. So in patient with cancer and anti-phospholipid antibody alone, we should not give these things. In patients with cancer, low molecular weight heparin is a recommended recommended anticoagulation compared to Novax. And if in patient with unprovoked proximal DVT or PE, but who has stopped already antiplatelet anticoagulant therapy, or because of high bleeding or some other factor, instead of giving no anticoagulation, some use of aspirin is better than giving no aspirin, particularly when there is no contraindications of aspirin. So, and all the anticoagulation should, even in patients with high risk bleeding, we should try to give minimum for 3 months and then take a call based on the individual thing as per the patients. And another thing which I want to highlight is, whenever dabigatran is started, for the first 5 to 10 days, we have to give this therapy along with the parenteral anticoagulant, particularly dabigatran or edoxaban, because it is being studied in only that way. So the manufacturer recommendation is initial 5 to 10 days of parenteral anticoagulant, right, unfractionated heparin or low molecular heparin, then only you switch over to dabigatran or edoxaban. Whereas apixaban and rivaroxaban can be started straight away, but for the initial 7 to 21 days, the dose is high, and followed by you have to go for the maintenance dose. So coming to the distal DVT, that is the infrapopliteal DVT, we see it occasionally, but how to treat it, because there was no clarity. What the latest recommendation is, if the patient has got any high risk features like severe symptoms, if it is more than 5 centimeters long, no other provoking factors, or patients with any secondary these things with elevated D-dimer, it is better to treat those patients also like a proximal DVT. If the patient doesn't have any high risk, no classical symptom, we can treat only with analgesics. We can repeat the ultrasound after 1 or 2 weeks and then see if it is extending proximally, and then take a call to continue the oral anticoagulation. So to summarize, the duration of oral anticoagulation in a patient with a provoked venous thromboembolism, that is with a definitive major transient risk factor, is 3 months, and in all other people it is an extended. And coming to the choice of anticoagulants, it's clearly the oral anticoagulants is the first line agents of treatment of acute venous thromboembolism in patients without cancer and normal renal function. And of course, in antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, we should use only vitamin K anticoagulants. There is no role for newer anticoagulants in patients with antiphospholipid antibody syndrome. And in pregnancy and cancer, where Novax cannot be given, low molecular weight heparin becomes the drug of choice. And if we are not able to use one of these, either a vitamin Ka or Novax, then we can consider aspirin in prevention of recurrent venous thromboembolisms who stop for any reason, particularly an unprovoked or DVT or so. But whatever it is, we have to assess the patient periodically, 6 months to 1 year basis, to look at the benefits of the oral anticoagulation therapy we are giving, and also the bleeding risk in that given patient, and then we have to decide on the treatment. Thank you very much.
Good, Ramnath. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Done a good job, GV. And there are a few questions that are popping up by audience. What do I do if my patient is scheduled for tooth pulling and he is taking dabigatran with normal renal function? Probably it's prudent to stop it for at least for 72 hours, along with antiplatelets, and also look at for what condition it is prescribed, and get a cardiology clearance, why it was prescribed from the prescribing doctor, what is the risk of stopping this, and if the risk is very high, probably cover it up with low molecular weight heparin. You're able to see the questions, Ramnath?
Yes, sir, I'm able to see.
Okay. How do I measure or improve adherence? Measuring is not possible, unlike with vitamin K antagonists like INR. So adherence, you can't really check. Maybe a pill count, seeing that how many pills he has taken is the only way. The other ones you can take, Ramnath.
Yes, sir. So how will we compare bleeding of vitamin K antagonists versus Novax? The biggest advantage of Novax versus vitamin K antagonist itself is less bleeding with more efficacy. So we can definitely, in a given patient, except for certain situations which we have told already, we can go for a Novax. And regarding the intracranial bleed, there are some studies showing definitely the dabigatran has got lesser intracranial bleed compared with, like rivaroxaban and other things. But there are only few studies, so we cannot choose the drug based on only those things. So we have to, as we said already, we have to decide what is the indication of the patient for oral anticoagulants. Based on the indication, we should choose either the vitamin K anticoagulants or the Novac. I think in the Novac, we have to choose based on the individual patients. How do I adjust doses for my patients with renal insufficiency? So in patients with mild renal insufficiency, as we said, the creatinine clearance is more than 15 and up to 30. Rivaroxaban and apixaban can be tried. Dabigatran is out of question once the patient develops a renal insufficiency. There is no data. But in patients with renal insufficiency severe, that is the creatinine clearance less than 15, none of the newer anticoagulants has been tried or recommended. So is warfarin or azithromycin is safe. That is already dealt by Dr. GV. It also has got some problems in ESRD, but comparing these two, vitamin K anticoagulants versus the Novac, I would choose azithromycin in patients with newer coagulants. In patients with severe CKD, because we can at least measure the efficacy, and then we can monitor by doing INR. And number two, we have a definite antidote. So that would be the choice.
Ramnath, the only issue is in patients who develop stroke and being treated as normal sinus rhythm, they're on dual antiplatelets, statins. All other investigations are negative, including the carotid Doppler. Ascending aorta is normal. There is no cardiac source of embolism. Despite being on dual antiplatelets, some of them do develop recurrence of stroke with no evidence of AF on ECG. And the more we try to figure out what is arrhythmia for these patients, extended recording for 7 days, etc., some of the AFs are picked up. In some, it still would be no AF, normal sinus, but recurrence of stroke with dual antiplatelets, with good adherence by the patient, watching that he had been taking the medicines. Do you have a situation there wherein we just give him direct acting oral and direct oral anticoagulation plus aspirin, or do we have to wait till AF props up?
Very tricky question, because there is no data or evidence to answer this question, sir. But I think, you have an enormous clinical experience. As you said, after completely investigating for a paroxysmal atrial fibrillation, and GV also highlighted this point in his talk, the commonest, reason for stroke in elderly without any other identifiable source, like location in either no carotid disease or no intracranial arterial disease, then the commonest reason is paroxysmal AF. I think in patients who develop a recurrent TIA, in spite of both anticoagulants, I would assess the patient's bleeding risk. If the patient's bleeding risk is not much, I think we can try a newer anticoagulant. With in terms of expecting the better results compared to only pure antiplatelet. What is your say, sir? Dr. GV, on this? I would in fact like you to answer this question, because you have got the huge experience on these patients.
I truly agree with you what you are telling.
What do your call, sir?
No, as you said, if the risk of bleeding is less, if the risk of bleeding is less as assessed based on various parameters, just not diagnosing AF is not the reason to stop giving direct oral anticoagulation along with aspirin, especially when somebody develops a recurrence of stroke on dual antiplatelets.
Yeah.
The same thing we had seen in high thrombus loads, high thrombus load situations, both in peripheral arteries and in coronary arteries, and also in the DVT situations, despite thrombolysis not resolving. There are various mechanical methods for resolving the DVTs to prevent post-DVT syndrome. Some of them, I think, if the risk of bleeding assessed is less, maybe for 3 months, direct oral anticoagulation along with one antiplatelet may be useful. And as I said, like those patients with prosthetic valves, that's a different issue at all, and it doesn't come into today's discussion. There's one more question. Sepsis-associated AF, particularly if associated with electrolyte imbalance, do we need to rule out paroxysmal AF? That's a very good question. Even if the AF is unprovoked or provoked, AF is AF. AF will lead to thrombus in LA appendage or LA, and that might lead to CVA, whatever the situation the AF develops. So it is most likely that we will be putting them on direct oral anticoagulation along with aspirin. Adding the third drug apart from aspirin, clopidogrel, to use direct oral anticoagulation. I think this is extremely rare situations where we do see patients with a huge thrombus load. And are there any guidelines about that, Ramnath? Using ticagrelor, aspirin plus direct oral anticoagulant?
Actually, all the guidelines say it is contraindicated to use direct oral anticoagulant along with dual antiplatelets because more bleeding but no increased efficacy. So whenever we use direct oral anticoagulant, we have to go on single antiplatelet.
Anything else? Are there any more questions? Or?
Sir, yes, sir. For two questions, sir. Sir, so how would you sir? How do you select between Novax and VK VK, sir? Like indication wise.
No, Bharat, I can't hear you clearly.
Sir, especially like one is how do you select between Novax versus VKA indication wise, and how will you rate efficacy and safety of dabigatran versus other Novax and warfarin in non-valvular atrial fibrillation?
Ramnath?
Yes, sir. See, the answer to your first question, indication wise, it is very clear in the sense if you say take a mechanical prosthetic valve, the question is doesn't come about Novax. It's only vitamin K antagonist. The next indication of atrial fibrillation and as well as the venous thromboembolism disorders, both can be used. I think that's what the two talks are all about. So in patients, we can choose based on, for AF, we can choose based on the CHA2DS2-VASc score and as well as the Hasblood score, as Dr. GV told. And if the patient can afford, I think newer anticoagulant is a better option compared to vitamin K antagonist because of its disadvantages in AF. In venous thromboembolism, as I said, you have to look at the cause. If the patient has got a malignancy, or if the patient has got an antiphospholipid antibody syndrome, or if the patient is pregnant or other things, in these situations, you cannot use NOAC, or patient with severe hepatic or severe renal disease. So, but for these 4 situations in AF and venous thromboembolism, you can use NOAC. These 3 situations, antiphospholipid, cancer, we cannot use NOAC. We have to go for a vitamin K anticoagulant only. The next question of comparison of different NOACs. I've been looking into these aspects for the past 3-4 years and talking on various forums about various NOACs. Practically, there are very minimal differences between the dabigatran versus apixaban versus rivaroxaban. Though as days goes by, for some disorders, the evidence becomes more with something. If you see, actually, the venous thromboembolism, the first drug which got approved was actually rivaroxaban. But then the dabigatran has got huge, robust data, so with which it became a kind of gold standard for venous thromboembolism, all those things used all over the world. But you have to choose these 3 drugs mainly based on the individual patient, particularly the pharmacokinetic profile of these 3 drugs, whether they have got associated renal disease, liver disease, and the dosages used. The only disadvantage with dabigatran is, if at all we have to use 150 milligram BD and all 110 milligram BD in patient with high bleeding score. But the 110 milligram BD with high bleeding score is not fully tested in patients with venous thromboembolism for an extended use, whereas the rivaroxaban, apixaban, the lower dose is tested. So these are all very minor factors, but the biggest advantage of dabigatran, what I would say, is the cost. Before, there was only one molecule available, which was very hugely costly. So practically, when we tell it to the patients, many people, the adherence is not there, mainly because of the cost. Now, since the patency is over, the cost has come down in a huge way. I think still that is a reason dabigatran is most widely used among all these NOACs.
Okay, fine, sir. A few more questions are there, sir. One is on what initiatives to be taken to improve compliance of a patient. Can I answer?
I think the foremost and important thing would be educating the patient, educating the family, telling them upfront the cost implications. Initially, they may say, yes, we will take whatever it is. But taking into the situation of the elderly people's dependency financially on the caretakers, the cost is a very important factor for Indian patients. And also, elderly patients do forget things, and probably supervised administration of medication may be one which can lead to good adherence of therapy. The other question, I think already Ramnath asked, ticagrelor, aspirin, and direct oral anticoagulation should not be used, and in situations where you have to use one direct oral anticoagulation plus aspirin or ticagrelor. Ticagrelor being more powerful than aspirin, and aspirin resistance being there in some individuals. Probably that may be a better thing in acute situations like acute MI angioplasty with AF, etc.
Okay. Sir, two more questions, sir. Sir, especially in COVID patients, does DVT has increased, sir? So how you put NOACs for a prevention?
DVT is well known in patients with COVID, and then we had been looking into D-dimers and we had been giving low molecular weight heparins. And there had been some patients where the D-dimer never came back to normalcy. And even after prolonged low molecular weight heparin, like 3 to 4 weeks, once they become symptomatically good, meaning that they don't have any sequelae of COVID, but the D-dimer is persistently high, I'm not sure what to do in that situation. Maybe a direct oral anticoagulation. I've been giving them just aspirin. These are the patients who had an angioplasty, stent, CAPG, who developed subsequently COVID. Since they're on antiplatelets, I just continued antiplatelets. I don't know whether we can use direct oral anticoagulation in these individuals to a prolonged time, like 3 months after they recover from the COVID, in the presence of high D-dimer values, even at the end of 1 month. Does anybody know anything more?
Though there are no recommendations because the disease itself is new to everybody, but many people, they give this oral anticoagulation, particularly the direct oral anticoagulation, for at least 6 weeks when they show a definitive evidence of DVT or pulmonary embolisms. That has been given in some of the, standard recommendations by various institutes, though it is not in the guideline.
The bioprosthetic valve in patients with AF and use of Novak. Dr. Venkatesh, sir, you can.
Bioprosthetic valves half plate, I think probably after the first 3 months, we had been giving them only antiplatelets. And all the data available till today shows a good prognosis for these patients who are on only antiplatelets. It is being used to avoid lifelong oral anticoagulation in those individuals where it is not recommended to give oral anticoagulation, like renal disease, hepatic disease, etc. I think only antiplatelet should be enough for those individuals, unless they come into a situation where direct oral anticoagulation has to be given to them. Per se, bioprosthetic valve, one antiplatelet is good enough after 3 months. Bharat, I think if there are no questions, no further questions.
Yes, sir.
I think we can conclude. How to manage bleeding?
Yes, how to manage bleeding in case of concomitant use of other drugs affecting hemostasis. Risk benefit ratio in individual patients.
Along with direct oral anticoagulation. Since there is no antidote as of now, which is freely available, it's very difficult to manage these patients. And since the off-life is less, probably replacing the blood and components is the only way to treat them. You have any information, Bharat, on when are we getting a antidote?
Things are that's in 2022, like that, sir.
So is it available in India? That either has that monoclonal antibody against this thing? Is it available in India?
Yes, sir. But this Idursulfimab is available. I think there are no more questions, sir. So before concluding, sir, I shall request you all to give a take-home message. Then we can conclude today's message. From Dr. Vijay Kumar, sir.
Again, thank you very much for all the people. Take-home message would be to evaluate each patient individually, and especially in atrial fibrillation, you have to have very strong evidence not to give directly acting oral anticoagulations. At the same time, do not forget vitamin K anticoagulants. Do not dump them yet, because in a country like ours, large group of population probably will still need them. And once you educate them and once you direct them to a proper lab to do the PT-INRs, they will be able to manage it, and you can probably manage them over the phone most of the times. Developing a thrombotic stroke is devastating, and developing a cerebral hemorrhage is even more devastating. So we should individualize the therapy based on each individual's needs. The most important thing would be to educate the patient and the family, not once, twice, thrice, till they get educated and till you are satisfied that they are educated. Otherwise, don't prescribe these medicines.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Venkatesh, sir, your take-home message. I request you to unmute, sir. Dr. Venkatesh, sir, sorry, sir, Dr. Venkatesh, sir, I request you to unmute. Yes, sir, you can start.
Are you able to hear me? Yeah, sorry. Thank you for this forum, about India and audience as well, for being here for such a long time this afternoon. I would like to say the same as what my professor and my mentor has told already. In a patient with an AF, always err on using an anticoagulant. First, start an anticoagulant and think twice before stopping them. That would be the bottom line take-home message. And all these calculators and the scores, you may not be very much worried about calculating them or memorizing them. It's all just one click away from you. And so even amidst your busy practice, you can use those couple of scores which I have shown on the slides to use them to decide on whether to anticoagulate or not, or to use NOAC or not. So those couple of things will be of much use. So nothing more.
Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Ramanathan, sir.
Yeah, I think already told. Thank you all. For the opportunity. Both of them are already told the importance of VKA as well as the NOVAX. And as Sir said, we have to individualize the treatment. That is what is probably the most important to the given patient, which is best, and then give the patient, and more importantly, educate the patient as well as the family, so that they will continue. The adherence will be increased. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So before concluding, I would like to thank our moderator, Dr. Vijay Kumar, sir, for being present in our platform and giving a lot of rich insights with a wonderful discussion and driving the discussion very well. And with his very clinical experience, he has made things very clear to us. In spite of on Sunday, he made a time for us. So on behalf of ABOT, I would like to thank our moderator, Dr. Vijay Kumar, sir. And also, I would like to thank our experts, Dr. Venkatesh sir and Dr. Ramanathan sir, for their experience with valuable insights to all of us, and with excellent presentations from both of them. Also, and giving a lot of insight. So, I would like to thank both of you, sir. And also, I would like to thank our viewers. We have got around 180 logins. So, I would like to thank all the 180 doctors who are present on our platform and taking a valuable learnings from our experts. So I would like to thank each of them. And also I would like to thank our marketing team, sales team and technical team for coordinating well and making this event a successful one. So once again, I would like to thank our expert, Dr. Vijay Kumar sir, Dr. Venkatesh sir and Dr. Ramanathan sir. I'm just concluding today's session. Thank you one and all.
Thank you. Thank you very much.